Unlike a long-term rental where you have one that rents for $1,000 a night, and maybe the other one rents for $1,000 a night because they're similar, you could have two short-term rentals that are similar, but they make totally different returns based on how well they're managed.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Leverage Podcast and Power Your Business with Assistance. And we're talking today to Tim Hubbard. Tim is the well-known international real estate investor with a focus on short-term rentals across 4 countries and more than 10 cities. His team expertly manages properties virtually, hosting over 35,000 guests, and he's the host of the Short-Term Rental Riches podcast. Is that right, Tim? Or did I miss anything?
That's right. That's right.
All
you
right.
nailed it. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Tim. And you're also managing director of Midtown Stays.
Correct.
And a podcast.
It's called Short-Term Rental Riches. Yeah, we're on all the podcast outlets, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. So any of those should pop right up.
Nice. And I know before the podcast recording, we've kind of talked, and you said you're currently in Brazil, but you also spent some time in Colombia, and looks like you're 100% virtual.
I'm from California originally, and most of my portfolio is in the US, but I pretty much left permanently like around 7 years ago, and I was living most of the time in Colombia. And then I came down here to Brazil during the COVID time and actually got kind of stuck down here and then just ended up really liking it. So now I spend about half my time here and half the time in Colombia for the most part.
This all began with a high school trip, right? That I wanted to start with that. So can you share something about your experience in Spain, how you kickstarted your love for traveling? Because I know you've been around the globe.
Yeah, that was an opportunity to go to Spain when I was in high school, an exchange program, but just for a few weeks in the summer. And I stayed with a family there, first time out of the US, and just realized the world was really large and it was different everywhere and cultures were different and everything. And so I wanted to be able to explore that. And then, so I kind of got the travel bug, I guess, back then.
During your so-called exploration phase, I mean, I've read your website, and on your website, you say that Rich Poor Dad book played a huge role in how you look at money. And that kind of changed your mindset. So what are some of the key things that you picked up that you can see that every entrepreneur should keep in mind, regardless of the industry they're working in?
Well, for me, I mean, after discovering I want to be able to travel, and back in those days, it wasn't very common to be able to work virtually. And so I wanted to find a way to be able to do that. And real estate is, a lot of people become wealthy in real estate and they generate what they call passive income. And so that's what I was trying to do. And that's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad really motivated me to do, was basically just look for assets that would pay the bills without having to trade my time for the money. So that's the whole mindset shift from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I think for anyone that's starting a business or whatever.
Do you own properties, or you do what's called a rental arbitrage?
I own most of mine. So I own about 70 properties, and then we also manage a lot. So I started on the long-term rental side of things. I was, after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, not right after, but when I was able to, I got my first property and I had long-term tenants. And I did that for about 5 years. I was acquiring properties slowly but surely with long-term tenants. And then during that time, I was staying in lots of short-term rentals, and I realized like, hey, these properties generate way more revenue. And so I switched some of mine over that I already had, and they did way better. And so then I started focusing on properties that as short-term rentals.
You're being remote. Do you still need to have somebody locally there present to manage the properties, or you can do it remotely and you can just only have the cleaners to do the cleaning and kind of like, properties? Or how does it work for you?
Yeah, good question. So there's really 2 teams there. We have most of the things we can do online with short-term rental or property management in general, but we can't clean the property virtually. And so, yeah, we have to have a on-the-ground housekeeping team and maintenance team. So we always work with both. That book was really just an eye-opener for me, like it was for a lot of people, that there's easier ways to do things, to be more efficient with our time, and that there's lots of ways, opportunities to make a living without, and doing it virtually. I guess, and not spending 80 hours a week doing it. So there was a lot of eye openers from that book. I think it was a really good one.
My understanding for your company, you use a lot of VAs.
Yeah, that's right. We have team members in Philippines and Mexico and Europe.
Nice. How many total team members do you have?
13 at the moment full time, and then we have a handful that we work with part time as well.
So do you manage properties for others, or this is just only all your properties that you're managing?
It started just with my properties. So we were managing, I was basically building a team to help me with my own portfolio. And then last year, I've had the podcast for a while, and a lot of people are always reaching out like, hey, can you help me with my property? And it was always like, no, I never really got into this to do property management, but we were essentially doing that for my own portfolio. And we built a big enough team to where last year we're like, we might as well. And so that's been a lot of fun. We started managing other properties virtually last year, and we've brought them on from Canada to Pennsylvania to California. I mean, all across the board. So that's been a fun journey.
So is it fair to say that it kind of started out like as a side hustle and it kind of turned into a business managing for others?
The managing is, I would say, still a side hustle for me. My main focus is in investing in the properties. It's just that our team was big enough to handle other properties, and we could do it all over the world without having to develop or hire a whole bunch of people, because we can centralize a lot of the operations. So I think my focus is, and probably always will be, is still investing. But I have to have good management to have good investments. And so we're going to be managing going forward too. So
you still buy properties, right? Even in this crazy market that we have.
I haven't bought a property in the US for a couple years now. Yeah, it has changed a lot, but I'm doing a development in Colombia. So we're doing a ground up development of short-term rentals, which is exciting.
What part?
In Medellin.
Oh, I've heard it. So it's been growing pretty good, and
yeah, it's a great
destination.
Definitely, it's really grown a lot. I went down there the first time in 2015, and it's just every time I'm there. I'm in Brazil right now, but every time I go back, it's like there's just so many more people, and it's grown so much more. So I think it's a really good market. But to answer your initial question there, do I buy properties virtually? I have bought properties that I've never actually seen in person, but always with someone that I really trust that's there to go through the property with me. And also we have to understand the market, and we still do inspections and do all that. So I prefer to be there and see them, but that hasn't always been the case.
Since you mentioned you have about people who manage it remotely and they're all over the world, you mentioned Philippines, Europe, Mexico. So could you tell me like how you guys manage them? What specific tasks your virtual assistants do to manage your properties? Or at least, just kind of like day-to-day routine?
Yeah, they help with everything. So from the moment we start with a property, we have to research the market to figure out how to best price it. That's a lot of work, making sure that we don't underprice property or overprice it and risk not getting occupied. And so we do that market study. We do the actual listing creation. So what people are going to see online when they're on Airbnb or VRBO or Booking.com or wherever it happens to be. All of those integrations. So we have to accept credit card payments. We have to charge deposits. We have to get rental agreements signed. We have to verify the guests, manage the reviews. The whole process, really. The only thing that our virtual team doesn't do is the physical cleaning or maintenance, but we do all that coordination
with the cleaners, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we do all the coordination. So really everything except for the physical cleaning and maintenance of a property.
So they respond to guest inquiries. And my understanding, you don't only do it on like one specific platform like Airbnb, you're like all over. And probably, I assume that you probably have a website for each property where people can book directly. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
So obviously somebody has to manage that part. Like when the inquiry comes in, if there's a lease agreement needs to be signed off, they can just email this person lease agreement, negotiate the terms, right? Like somebody wants to do not so short term, like for a month or two, usually a lease agreement comes in. So that's pretty good. And how many properties do you guys have under your management?
We have 82 at the moment.
Tim, what would you recommend to somebody who wants to get into short-term rentals like right now? Should they go buy a property? Should they do rental arbitrage? Because a lot of people right now talk about this arbitrage thing, and I myself personally don't like it. But I know a lot of people do it anyway, especially who don't have cash to invest, which I think is kind of could be dangerous. But what would you recommend to people who want to who basically want to dabble into it?
So short-term rentals are interesting because someone could buy a short-term rental because they want to live in it part of the year and have it as a vacation home. And then someone else could want to buy the same short-term rental as 100% investment and they have no emotional attachment to it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing is deciding what we want out of it. Is it a property that we're just looking to get maximum return on? And assuming it's a property that we just want to have as an investment, there's no emotional part to it whatsoever, then narrowing down markets that are going to make the most sense for that. So some markets, obviously, the prices are much higher, but the nightly rents maybe don't justify that. And so narrowing down a market, or I suggest multiple markets or multiple zip codes, because it's not just on a market level, right? We can have a city that has one neighborhood that could do really well, but the rest of the city maybe doesn't do so well. So there's some really good tools now for sort of sorting through that data, like AirDNA or Price Labs. That people can buy access to this data for. So I think that's the first thing, sort of deciding. And then also deciding how much work that they want to put into it. A lot of people that got into traditional real estate with the mindset that it's going to be fully passive, hire a management company, right? We have to manage the managers still, right?
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
Hopefully they found a good manager. But that piece is crucial with a short-term rental too. I would say it's even more crucial because unlike a long-term rental where you have one that rents for $1,000 a night and maybe the other one rents for $1,000 a night because they're similar, you could have two short-term rentals that are similar, but they make totally different returns based on how well they're managed. So deciding on that part, how you want to do it, if you want to do it yourself. So quite a bit that goes into it, but I think that's kind of some of the intro steps.
I mean, I have some short-term rentals down in Florida. I live in Seattle, so in Miami area. But again, I see what's going on into this, and I gotta have somebody on the ground personally. I mean, who's managing, who can go check on things, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, and you cannot really have it totally hands off. You got to monitor some of these things. It doesn't matter how good your manager is or your VA is. You still got to look into this, and you still have to have some sort of oversight. There's no such thing as a passive income. That's my mindset. You still got to do some work. What kind of a platform do you use for managing your STRs? I mean, what is your team using? Because obviously a lot of goes into it. You got to be having everything centralized.
Yeah, we use a lot of different software programs, but the main one for short-term rentals is what we'd call property management software platform or PMS platform. That's sort of like your central hub. So that's going to help you sync calendars between different websites. It's going to sync with another tool that helps you with all your pricing. So we use a different set of software for our pricing. We use a different set of software again for our operations. So yeah, having a clean property where things aren't getting damaged and everything's getting checked before every guest is essential. So we use a separate piece of software just to handle all of the operations. We use a piece of software for digital guidebooks. We use remote lock software. We use remote cameras. I mean, we use a lot of different programs, but they all sort of tie in, or most of them tie into our PMS software.
Well, that's great, man. And again, your virtual assistants do most of the work, my understanding, and coordination with your on-the-ground crew who's doing the cleaning, repairs, right? Obviously, you got to have contacts for the repairs and everything, payments, systems, everything, right? So that's great. That's great. So looks like you're doing a good work for yourself and for others, Tim. And I've seen that your podcast is doing pretty good as well.
The podcast was sort of started, I had friends asking me that were in the US, and they had properties there, like, hey, how are you managing your property from Colombia and still adding more properties until growing all of this? And so the idea for the podcast was really just a way to answer a lot of those questions. So they're quick, short, actionable episodes. Most of them are like 10 to 15 minutes, just going over like one topic, like, what software do you use, for example, like you just asked me, or how do you decide on a property? So
That's what I just asked you. Exactly. Because yeah, I mean, I'm doing it myself and I'm curious. So I'm already asking you stuff that I could probably use in my own business of the management of my own properties. So that's good to know.
I hope
And
so.
again, guys, you don't need to have a on the ground manager, looks like, in every specific location. You can do it all remotely, or you can have virtual assistant help you run it remotely, as long as you have certain systems built in already and have some sort of a blueprint of how things work.
Yeah, you definitely have to have a way to track things. You mentioned you have the housekeeper. I mean, a lot of times you can have your housekeeper do these things or these additional, inspections. It really comes down to the relationship that you've set up. And so if someone's just getting started, a lot of times that's a good way to go about it, where you can handle a lot online, and then you just have a really good relationship with your housekeeper or someone there locally, and you can handle the rest of it.
Specifically in the city of Hollywood, Florida, I have an SDR there, one of my houses there, and they require a license. And one of the requirements for the license, that it has to be a local person within 30-minute drive to the house. So you got to designate that person on the ground who's there, who can just drive there and, and basically address any concerns. So probably like a housekeeper would be one of those people, I guess, right?
Yeah. That'd be a good option.
Well, man, thank you for your time again. And it's been really useful. I'm just going to wrap it up. And, I'm not going to torture you a lot on this, but I'm glad to see that you're doing very well in this. And I'll be following you on Instagram and checking out your podcast, man. And so that's good.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right, man. Thank you.
I just had a great conversation with Pavel about creating content to scale your business.
Click the link, check it out. Click the link below. Again, I highly endorse Virtudesk if you're going to save time, money, and resources. Click the link down below.
Click on the link down below.
How to make your brand stand out in the real estate industry.